The first time Ben noticed it, it was just a shadow, a trick of the eye, a shape that didn't belong in the corner of his room. The second time, he was sure something moved. The third time, it whispered his name. And that was when the lights stopped working. Ben Palmer wasn't the kind of person who believed in the supernatural, at least, not until Blackwood Street. Growing up in a small, run-down town, Ben's life had always been filled with more reality than mystery. His childhood home had been cramped, his parents constantly struggling to make ends meet. His dad walked out when he was 10, and his mother, already stretched thin, was too exhausted to notice when Ben started staying up late, staring at the shadows in his room. Because that was when it had started. He had been 8 the first time he heard it. A whisper, software breathy, calling his name from the corner of his room. At first he thought it was the wind slipping through the cracks in the walls, but then the shadows started moving. It had been subtle, a shifting darkness that clung to his closet stretched beneath his bed. His nightlight barely kept it at bay. And then, one night, he had seen it. Not fully, not directly, but in the deepest part of his room, where the light didn't reach, something had been standing there, watching. It never did anything, never stepped closer, until the night it whispered his name. He told his mother, but she waved him off. "Bad dreams," she had said. "You're just scared of the dark." But Ben knew better, and the next night, when he refused to sleep with the lights off, his mother had unplugged the nightlight. She was trying to teach him to be brave, but that was the first night the thing in the dark touched him. Ben didn't remember much from that night. He only remembered waking up to the power being out. His room had been swallowed by pitch-black darkness, and the whisper was right next to his bed. Ben. He had frozen, his throat locked up, every muscle in his body refusing to move. And then, something cold and dry slid against his arm. Fingers, long, wrong. His scream had been instant. His mother rushed in, flicking on the overhead light. The second the brightness filled the room, it was gone. Nothing was there. But Ben had seen it, the last traces of something retreating into the shadows, folding itself into the corner, slipping into nothingness. His mother held him, shushed him, but he refused to sleep, and from that night forward, Ben never slept in total darkness again. Eventually, the whispers stopped. The shadows returned to normal. The thing in the dark, Nyxborn, as he would later learn its name, left him alone. Or at least, that's what he told himself. He left his childhood home at 18, moved into a dorm, started fresh. He never mentioned it again, but some part of him always knew it wasn't over, because the fear never left. Every room he ever lived in, he kept the lights on at night, every single one. People teased him for it, called him paranoid, said he was scared of something that wasn't real, and maybe they were right, until he moved into Blackwood Street, and the lights started flickering, and the hallway became too dark, and the whisper returned. Ben. It had found him again. Ben had spent years trying to convince himself he had imagined it. But the truth was, he had done research. He had scoured forums, read stories, looked into old legends about things that moved in the dark. Most of it was ridiculous, ghost stories, urban myths. But one post, buried in an old forum, had stuck with him. It was from a woman who claimed she had seen the same thing. Something in the dark, something that whispered her name. And she had a name for it. Nyxborn. A thing that wasn't alive in the way people understood. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't a demon. It was something older, something that didn't just live in darkness. It was part of it. And once it noticed you, it never truly left. It only waited. Until the lights went out again. Blackwood Street. It was a decent place. Small but affordable. Hardwood floors, old fixtures, a decent-sized living room that connected to a narrow hallway leading to the bedroom and bathroom. The windows let in just enough light during the day, though the corners of the rooms always seemed oddly dim. The landlord had warned him about the quirks. The wiring was old, the lights sometimes flickered, the heater rattled when it kicked on. Nothing unusual, but still. Ben stepped forward, his sneakers making a faint creak against the wood. The air inside was cold despite it being the middle of summer. The previous tenant had left in a hurry. The cabinets were empty, the fridge unplugged, and a faint musty scent lingered, like something had been shut up for too long. He told himself he was just being paranoid. New places always felt weird at first, yet as he set his box down on the scuffed coffee table and looked toward the hallway leading to his bedroom, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was already waiting for him in the dark. By the third night, Ben knew something was wrong. At first it was the small things. The apartment always felt too cold, no matter how much he adjusted the thermostat. The air carried a faint, metallic scent, like old pennies and damp wood. The lights flickered more than they should have, not the quick, momentary blinks of old wiring, but slow, deliberate pulses, like something was testing them. Then there was his phone. The battery drained at an alarming rate, no matter how long he charged it. Twice, he woke up to find it completely dead, despite plugging it in before bed. When he checked his call logs, he found 2-minute-long voicemails with no sound, just static. And then, there were the shadows. They stretched too far, bent the wrong way. He noticed them more at night, not just on the walls, but creeping across the floor, pooling under the furniture. At first, he thought it was the way the streetlights spilled through the blinds, but sometimes, he swore he saw them move. The hallway leading to his bedroom was the worst. No matter how bright his lamps were, the darkness at the farthest end was always deeper than the rest, like it was swallowing the light. And sometimes, when he passed it on his way to the bathroom, he could feel something watching him from inside that blackness. The first time Ben saw it, it wasn't clear, just a flicker of movement, something shifting in the hallway. He had been lying in bed, scrolling through his phone, the blue light reflecting off the ceiling. His eyelids were heavy, exhaustion pressing in, when something, a ripple of darkness, caught his eye. At first, he ignored it. Shadows moved all the time. A passing car could shift the light through his window. But when he looked up again, something felt off. The hallway was too dark. Not the natural kind of dark, the kind where your eyes adjust and shapes start to take form. This was something else, something deeper. Ben's stomach tightened. The small lamp on his nightstand glowed softly, pushing back the dark, but somehow it barely reached the doorway. The light faded at the edges, like something was swallowing it. He forced himself to stare at the farthest part of the hall, and that's when he saw it. A shape, tall, unmoving. At first, he thought it was just the way the shadows gathered in the corner, but the longer he looked, the clearer it became. It had a form, it had weight, and it was watching him. His breath came quick, shallow. His fingers twitched against the sheets. It wasn't a person. It wasn't a shadow. It was something else. Something standing just outside the reach of the light. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Ben didn't blink, didn't breathe. The figure in the dark didn't either. And then, The lights flickered, only for a second, just long enough for everything to go black. When the light came back, his stomach dropped. The shape was closer, not by much, maybe a foot, but it was enough. Ben's grip on his phone tightened. His pulse hammered in his throat. It hadn't moved. It hadn't. But somehow, it was nearer now. His fingers hovered over the flashlight button. A small, desperate part of him wanted to turn it on, wanted to see it clearly. Don't let it know you see it. Don't react. The lights flickered again, another second of darkness. When they returned, the thing was at the threshold of his room. Ben's breath hitched. A cold sweat prickled down his spine. He could see the edges of it now. It wasn't just a shadow. It was wrong. Its limbs were long, too long. Its body twisted in ways that made his stomach lurch. But the worst part? It had no face, just a void where features should have been. And then, in the silence, it leaned forward. Ben's body locked up. His hand shook. And then just inches from his bed, it whispered.
Ben.
Right next to him. The power goes out. Ben shot up in bed, gasping. His heart hammered against his ribs. The lights flickered again. Longer this time. The room plunged into complete darkness. The power cut out entirely. Ben's fingers scrambled for his phone, tapping the flashlight button with shaking hands. The dim beam barely cut through the black. But it was enough to see that the hallway was empty. The thing, whatever it was gone. He exhaled shakily, trying to calm himself. It's over, he told himself. But deep down, he knew he was lying. The next day, Ben didn't go to work. He didn't eat, and he didn't sleep. He sat in his living room. Every light in the apartment turned on. The TV blared some meaningless reality show, but he barely heard it. His fingers hovered over his phone, debating whether to call Sarah. Would she even believe him? Hell, did he even believe it? Ben's breath stalled. His eyes snapped toward the switch across the room. His stomach twisted. The switch was still up. The bulb had just died. And then the one in the bathroom flickered. Then the lamp beside the couch. One by one, the lights in his apartment went out, until the only glow left was the television. And then the screen cut to static. Ben stood up so fast the chair screeched against the floor. The air in the apartment changed. The temperature dropped instantly, like a wave of ice had swallowed the room. And then, in the quiet, from the hallway, a single whisper.
Ben.
It's 3 a.m. Ben sat frozen on his bed, knees pulled to his chest. The power was gone. His phone was dead, the apartment was black, and the thing, Nixborn, was inside. The air felt thick, wrong, pressing against his skin like wet fabric. A presence filled the room, moving in the dark. Not footsteps, not breathing. Something deeper, and then, slowly. The closet door creaked open. Ben squeezed his eyes shut, his chest rising and falling in rapid, panicked breaths. If you don't look, it can't see you. If you don't look, it can't take you. Silence, a pause, and then right by his ear.
Look.
Sarah got a call from Ben the next night, a single voicemail. She pressed play, frowning, static, heavy breathing. Then, his voice, a shaking whisper.
The light won't save me. It doesn't need the dark anymore.
The line went dead. She called him back. No answer. Worried, she drove to his apartment. The door was unlocked. The lights were on. But Ben was gone. The police found nothing. No sign of forced entry. No sign of struggle. Just his phone lying face up on his bed. An unsent text. Sarah read it, her throat tightening. It's still here. Sarah moved on, tried to, but some nights, in the quiet of her apartment, she swears she hears it. A whisper, software almost familiar, right behind her.
Sarah,